Beneath the green lawns and gleaming cities of Florida, a catastrophe is unfolding. It is silent, invisible, and if it is not stopped, it will mean the end of the state as we know it. More than 22 million people live on a peninsula surrounded by the ocean, a paradise built on a foundation of sand and porous rock. They drink, farm, and build their lives from a single vast source of fresh water hidden beneath their feet, the Floridan Aquifer. And that aquifer is being poisoned. For decades, the ocean has been pushing its way inland, not over the land, but through it, a slow-motion invasion of saltwater contaminating the fresh water that millions depend on. The ground itself is beginning to sink. The systems built to protect it are starting to fail. So the state is now engaged in a desperate, unseen war fought with massive injection wells, billion-dollar pipelines, and computer models that predict a future no one is prepared for. It is an engineering battle on a scale few can comprehend. It may not be enough. We spend hundreds of hours researching these stories, the ones that unfold just beneath the surface of our daily lives. A huge number of people who find value in this work often forget one simple thing: subscribing. It's the single most important way you can support our ability to keep creating this content. Please, take 1 second to click that button. It matters more than you know. Let's begin. The real question is, are these monumental efforts saving Florida, or are they just the most expensive delay tactics ever devised against a problem that is fundamentally unsolvable? Florida was never meant to support this many people. The state as we imagine it is an invention of the 20th century, a triumph of air conditioning, ambition, and water, especially water. Before the boom, much of the state was a sprawling wetland, a humid, difficult landscape considered by many to be uninhabitable swampland. Not a destination, a place to get through. Then came the developers, the retirees, the dreamers, and the discovery of the aquifer. It seemed like a miracle, a seemingly endless supply of pure, clean, naturally filtered water that could be accessed with nothing more than a well drilled a few hundred feet into the ground. It was the fuel for Florida's explosion. The population grew from under 1 million in 1920 to nearly 6 million by 1960. By the year 2000, it was 16 million. Today, it is over 22 million. Now with nearly 1,000 new residents arriving every single day, all of them are thirsty. To sustain this growth, Florida draws approximately 4.3 billion gallons of fresh water from its aquifers every single day. That is not a typo. 4.3 billion gallons. To put that figure into terms that mean something, it is enough water to fill more than 6,500 Olympic-sized swimming pools every 24 hours. This immense volume is pulled from a geological formation that underlies the entire state, stretching more than 100,000 square miles, a vast subterranean reservoir of limestone and dolomite. This rock is not solid. It is porous, like a sponge, riddled with cracks, channels, and immense caverns carved by water over millions of years. This structure is what makes the aquifer so prodigiously productive. It is also its greatest vulnerability. It was seen as a gift from nature, a bottomless reserve that would forever quench the state's insatiable thirst. It was not bottomless. It never was. The physics of a coastal aquifer are a delicate balancing act. For millennia, the system was in equilibrium. The immense volume of fresh water stored in the limestone sponge exerted its own pressure, a powerful outward force pressing against the surrounding seawater. This freshwater pressure acted as a natural barrier, holding the salt water of the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico at bay, miles offshore and deep underground. The line between fresh and salt was stable, maintained by rainfall that recharged the aquifer and kept the pressure high. Then humans began drilling wells. With millions of them. Every well acts like a straw, pulling water up from the sponge and lowering the pressure in its immediate vicinity. When a few thousand people did this, the impact was negligible. When millions began doing it, all at once, the system began to change. The science behind this is fascinating, and the debate over what to do next is intense. We'd genuinely like to hear your perspective in the comments below. What do you think is the real solution? Pumping on an industrial scale created what hydrologists call a cone of depression, an inverted cone in the water table where the pressure drops dramatically. As cities like Miami, Tampa, and Jacksonville grew, their well fields pulled more and more water, and these cones of depression grew deeper and wider. The outward pressure of the fresh water began to fail, and the ocean, which had been held back for eons, began to advance. This is saltwater intrusion. It is not a mixing, it is a replacement. Because saltwater is denser than freshwater, it moves inland as a wedge, creeping along the bottom of the aquifer, unseen and untasted, until it reaches a drinking water well. The first alarms were sounded not by scientists, but by residents. In the 1930s and 40s, homeowners in coastal Miami and Brooklyn, New York began complaining their tap water tasted salty. Wells that had provided clean water for decades were suddenly turning saline. The problem was diagnosed quickly. Overpumping had lowered the freshwater table, reversing the natural pressure gradient. The ocean was winning. The initial response was logical and tragically insufficient. If a well became too salty, warm water authorities would simply shut it down and drill a new one further inland. It was a strategic retreat. For a time, it worked. As the saltwater front advanced, the cities moved their straws, chasing the fresh water deeper into the state. But this was not a solution. It was an acceleration of the problem. Every new well drilled further inland simply expanded the cone of depression, pulling the saltwater front along with it. They were not outrunning the intrusion, they were inviting it closer. By the 1970s, the salt line, a term that water managers began to use with grave seriousness, had migrated miles inland from where it had sat just a few decades prior. In southeast Florida, wells that had once been 5 miles from the coast were now contaminated. The planners realized they were in a losing race against geology and their own population growth. They could not retreat forever. Something else had to be done, something audacious. This predicament forced Florida's water managers into a new phase, not avoidance, but warfare. They began to design and build massive engineering projects designed to actively fight the ocean's advance. One of the most ambitious strategies is known as Aquifer Storage and Recovery, or ASR. The concept is both simple and profoundly complex. During the wet season, when rainfall is plentiful and rivers are high, billions of gallons of excess freshwater are captured, treated to drinking water standards, and then injected deep underground into the aquifer. The goal is to create a massive underground bubble of freshwater. This bubble serves two purposes. First, it acts as a savings account, storing water for use during the dry season. Second, and more critically, it is designed to increase the pressure in the aquifer, forming a hydraulic barrier to push back against the encroaching wedge of salt water. It is a breathtakingly bold attempt to manually repressurize a geological formation the size of a state. This isn't just a story about Florida. It's a preview of a water crisis that will touch communities across the country. If you find this story important, please share it with your family and friends. And if you do, hitting that like button helps us reach even more people. The scale of these ASR projects is difficult to overstate. In places like Miami-Dade County, the plan involves a perimeter of nearly 36 high-pressure injection wells built along the coast. And these are not simple pipes. They are complex industrial facilities, costing tens of millions of dollars each, capable of forcing millions of gallons of water per day into rock formations thousands of feet below the surface. The engineering challenges are immense. The water must be treated to an exacting standard, purer in some ways than the native water in the aquifer, to avoid clogging the porous limestone or triggering unwanted chemical reactions with the surrounding rock. The pressure must be managed perfectly. Too little, and the saltwater wedge keeps moving. Too much, and you risk fracturing the rock, creating new pathways for contamination and potentially destabilizing the ground. It is a high-stakes balancing act performed in complete darkness, guided only by sensor readings and computer models. And it comes with an astonishing price tag. The Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which includes many of these ASR barrier projects, has a total estimated cost that has ballooned to over $23 billion. It is one of the most expensive and ambitious environmental restoration projects in human history. Critics argue the money is being spent on a flawed premise. They point to pilot projects where injected water migrated in unexpected ways, or where water quality degraded after months of storage underground, reacting with arsenic and other minerals in the deep rock. They argue that ASR wells are a technological fix for a problem of overconsumption, a way to enable more growth, more development, more people on a peninsula that is already far past its natural carrying capacity. Water managers push back with a stark reality. The people are already here, 22 million of them. ASR is not a growth strategy, it is a survival strategy, and it is not the only one. While some regions bet on ASR, others turn to a more direct and more controversial solution: desalination. If you cannot stop the salt from getting into your water, you can try to take the salt out. The Tampa Bay Seawater Desalination Plant, located in Apollo Beach, stands as a monument to this brutal logic. It is the largest desalination facility in the United States, capable of producing up to 25 million gallons of fresh water per day by pulling water directly from the bay and forcing it through a series of high-pressure reverse osmosis membranes. It is an engineering marvel. It is also an economic and environmental quagmire. The process is colossally energy-intensive. The Tampa plant can consume as much electricity as a small city, a constant, voracious drain on the power grid. This energy dependency makes the water it produces profoundly expensive, costing more than double what it costs to pump fresh water from the aquifer. It is a last resort, an emergency tap to be turned on only when the traditional sources are stressed to their breaking point. The uncomfortable question that the plant forces is one of trade-offs. To make fresh water, the plant produces a toxic byproduct, a super-concentrated brine. This effluent, twice as salty as the bay itself, must be diluted with more than 1 billion gallons of cooling water from a neighboring power plant before it can be safely discharged back into the ecosystem. The potential impacts on marine life and the bay's delicate chemistry are a subject of continuous, heated debate. Desalination offers a form of drought-proof security. It also represents a vision of the future where survival is dependent on burning immense amounts of fossil fuels to make the ocean drinkable. All because the free water beneath the ground is no longer a given. The state that once lived on a seemingly infinite water budget now finds itself paying an exorbitant price per gallon, caught between the advancing ocean and the rising costs of its own engineering solutions. The engineering was only ever half the battle. Just like in the arid West, Florida's water authorities began to realize that no amount of pipes or plants could outrun the math of a structural deficit. The other front in this war had to be conservation. A city consuming billions of gallons per day from a compromised aquifer had to change its culture. Not its pipes, its habits. The results have been quietly remarkable. Across the state, per capita water use has dropped significantly over the past 2 decades, even as the population continues to climb. Water management districts have implemented some of the strictest irrigation rules in the nation. Watering a lawn is now a tightly controlled activity, restricted to specific days of the week and specific hours of the night to minimize evaporative loss. Rebate programs pay homeowners to tear out thirsty sod and replace it with native, drought-tolerant landscaping. It is a slow, methodical campaign to undo the aesthetic of the lush, green northeastern lawn that was imported to a subtropical swamp. I know, we're asking again, but seriously, if you haven't subscribed yet, you're missing out. Think of it as an investment in your own curiosity. Plus, my boss gets really happy. Please click subscribe. Water recycling has become a critical tool. In some counties, nearly 100% of wastewater is treated and repurposed for irrigation, industrial uses, and even for recharging the aquifer itself, a closed loop that keeps every drop working. This reused water, often called purple pipe, water, because of the color of the pipes that carry it, has become a lifeline for golf courses, parks, and agricultural areas, reducing their demand on the pristine water needed for drinking. Yet, for every step forward in conservation, a new challenge emerges. The agricultural industry, a cornerstone of Florida's economy, remains one of the largest water users. The constant pressure for new housing developments to accommodate the influx of new residents places an unyielding strain on the system. The conservation successes are real. They are also being steadily outpaced by the sheer momentum of growth. This is the paradox of modern Florida. The state is becoming more water efficient at the same time its water problems are becoming more dire. The engineered solutions and conservation efforts were all designed to combat a known enemy, saltwater intrusion. But a second, more insidious threat was emerging. The aquifer was not just being poisoned, it was physically collapsing. The porous limestone that holds the water is not solid bedrock. Its structural integrity depends on the water pressure within it. As billions of gallons are pumped out, the hydrostatic pressure that helps support the overlying layers of sand and clay is reduced. The sponge is being squeezed dry, and as it deflates, the ground above it begins to sink. This is land subsidence. Unlike saltwater intrusion, it is largely irreversible. In parts of west-central Florida, decades of overpumping for agriculture and phosphate mining have caused the land to drop by feet, not inches. These sinkhole clusters are the most dramatic evidence of a phenomenon happening slowly all over the state. The collapse is not always a sudden, catastrophic event. More often, it is a slow, silent settling that cracks building foundations, breaks sewer lines, and alters floodplains. Worse, the subsidence permanently damages the aquifer itself. As the limestone compacts, its pores collapse. Its ability to store water is diminished forever. Even if pumping were to stop and rainfall were to return in abundance, a compacted aquifer can never hold as much water as it once did. The state is not just using up its water. It is actively destroying the container it comes in. This adds a terrifying new dimension to the crisis. It suggests a point of no return, a threshold beyond which the damage to the geological structure is so profound that the aquifer can never fully recover, no matter how many ASR wells are drilled or how many lawns go brown. The ground beneath Florida's cities is a finite resource, and it is being consumed along with the water it holds. But even this is not the greatest threat. The most formidable enemy is one that no pipeline or injection well can ever hope to defeat: sea level rise. And the entire battle against saltwater intrusion has been fought on the assumption of a static sea level. That assumption is now dangerously obsolete. The world's oceans are rising at an accelerating rate due to thermal expansion and melting ice sheets. For a low-lying peninsula like Florida, the consequences are existential. Every millimeter of sea level rise increases the pressure exerted by the ocean on the coastal aquifer. It gives the saltwater wedge more force, pushing it further inland with a relentless, inescapable power. The engineering solutions, the ASR barriers, the relocated well fields, they were all designed for the climate of the 20th century. They are now facing the physics of the 21st. The baseline is changing. The ocean is not just at the gates, it is raising the floor beneath them. This is the part of the story where everything comes into focus. And if this documentary has brought a critical issue into focus for you, then it has served its purpose. A final, quick reminder to subscribe is the best way to ensure we can keep doing it. Thank you. Scientists at the U.S. Geological Survey model this interaction with increasing alarm. Their projections show that even with drastic reductions in pumping, sea level rise alone is sufficient to continue driving saltwater further into Florida's aquifers for decades to come. It fundamentally rewrites the equation. The state could, in theory, achieve perfect water management, recycle every drop, halt all overpumping, and still lose the war. The opponent is no longer just local consumption, it is global climate change. This reality forces a sobering reevaluation of the multi-billion-dollar projects currently underway. Are they a permanent solution or a temporary fortification for a position that is, in the long run, indefensible? Paleoclimate research adds the final unsettling layer. By studying ancient coral reefs, sediment cores, and tree rings, scientists have reconstructed Florida's climate history over thousands of years. The record shows that the region has been subject to mega droughts in the past, periods of intense aridity lasting for decades, far more severe and prolonged than anything in modern recorded history. The 20th century, the period during which Florida's population boomed and its water infrastructure was built, was a relatively wet and stable period. The state's entire existence is predicated on a climate that may have been a historical anomaly. The recent droughts that have stressed the system to its breaking point may not be the worst-case scenario. They may be a return to the norm. This suggests that the aquifer system is naturally more fragile and susceptible to depletion than the engineers of the last century ever believed. They built a civilization during a lucky streak, and the climate is showing signs that the luck is running out. Florida is not a cautionary tale, not yet. It is an active laboratory, a place where humanity's ambition is colliding with geological limits and climatic change in real time. The engineering is brilliant. The conservation efforts are admirable. The sheer scale of the attempt to manage the water supply for 22 million people on a porous, a sinking peninsula surrounded by a rising ocean is a testament to human ingenuity. But ingenuity has its limits. The aquifer is not just a resource. It is a complex, living system with its own rules, its own history, and its own breaking points. The problem is not that the water is simply disappearing. It is being replaced by something unusable. The challenge is not just scarcity. It is contamination driven by forces that Florida alone cannot control. The battle for Florida's water is a preview of a conflict that will define the 21st century for coastal communities around the world. London, Jakarta, Shanghai, major global cities are facing the same lethal combination of subsidence, over-extraction, and sea level rise. Florida is simply on the front lines, the most visible place on the map where the invisible war is being fought. The state's future will be decided not by its beaches or its theme parks, but by the unseen movement of a saltwater boundary deep within the earth. It will be determined by the chloride parts per million in a municipal well, the subsidence rate in a suburban neighborhood, and the energy cost of a desalination plant. The ASR wells are still pumping. The conservation programs are still expanding. The engineers are still modeling, but the ocean is still rising. The ground is still sinking, and somewhere, deep beneath the surface of paradise, the clock is still running.